everybody.
Hi.
So great to see you guys. Anything that we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, I would love to entertain your questions about. So first, let me just say how honored I am to be among all of you, such an inspiring, impressive group of women who, of course, as I've learned, you're working to change policy and sort of rearrange the seats of power in Washington and beyond. So I really want to thank, of course, Leanne Peterson for giving me this warm welcome and giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you at this really important time, and also to her co-founder, Emily Bardash, for making the Professional Women in Advocacy Conference so timely and relevant today, and of course for the development of the leadership training that they have provided to women in business around the globe. So I'd like to also thank all the sponsors of this conference, because with their support, Leanne and Emily have been able to celebrate the power of women advocates for the past 5 years and going strong. I mean, the amount of attendees has just gone up, and that even you guys have all even exceeded their expectations this year. Also, one last big shout out to the many volunteers who are also obviously a key to the success of this conference. So, when Leanne called me a couple of months ago and asked if I would be interested in doing this, I wasn't sure then what topic we should tackle today. But after the past few weeks, one has presented itself. After the deluge of stories of Harvey Weinstein and James Toback, Bill O'Reilly, Mark Halperin, Kevin Spacey, I could go on. There are 18 other media bigwigs that have been publicly accused of sexual harassment, as well as everything that we've seen going on in Silicon Valley and in the halls of Congress and Wall Street and beyond. It seems that a very pressing topic has presented itself. So let's talk about sexual harassment and how advocacy and everything that you all are doing here today can be part of the solution. I think it's fair to say that we've been overdue for this conversation for a few decades. I think that for many years, many of us either ignored this topic or thought it was too taboo to touch, or we navigated around it in our own lives, or we hoped it would go away, or we were too embarrassed to talk about it. But now the floodgates have opened, and I feel, we can talk about this, I want to know your thoughts as well, but that we are at this watershed moment, it feels like, and there is this moment that it has turned into a movement of the hashtag #MeToo. And it turns out that this topic and this issue is bigger and more widespread than really, I think, any of us knew. What I have come to believe is that for women, it is basically a universal experience. About 6 months ago, I decided to speak out publicly about having been sexually harassed by the then head of Fox News, Roger Ailes. I did it then, rather than months or years earlier, because I had reached my own personal tipping point, where it was getting harder and harder for me to stay quiet on the sidelines. At that moment, when I spoke out in April, there were several stories already swirling around about Bill O'Reilly and some other Fox contributors, and I was assigned on my show, New Day, on CNN, to cover the developments of this story. So as a journalist, as you all know, I'm supposed to be impartial. I'm supposed to give every side a fair shake. But I started to feel as though I was being deceptive, and as though I was sort of withholding information from the viewers, acting as though I didn't know the truth. And I don't like sort of asking questions of my guests and pretending that I don't already know the answers. So I then sort of reached my own enough is enough moment, and I knew that it was time to speak out and just try to shed some light on the situation. I don't know about all of you, but for many years before I spoke out, I actually prided myself on my ability to endure unpleasant, uncomfortable situations. I saw it as like a badge of honor. Look at how capable and strong I am, that I can still get my work done in this uncomfortable environment. And that is probably not the right approach, I now know. I mean, I think that the ability to sort of navigate through a minefield is a good skill set, but I do not think that my kind of toughing it out alone approach did much to change what was happening. In fact, it kept me from knowing how many other women in my workplace were going through the same thing. And, listen, if we had all banded together, if we'd all known about each other, would it have ended sooner? Probably. But listen, I'm not trying to have this be an exercise in like self-flagellation or victim blaming. I'm just admitting that I did the best I could at the time, and there is now a recognition that we are stronger and more effective together. Look at what's happened in just the past month. Now that so many women are coming forward to tell their stories, we see these powerful men being fired, paying huge settlements. Their shows have been canceled. Their hit shows have been canceled. Some are facing criminal charges. So those outcomes really were unimaginable even just a year ago. Does that mean problem solved? Of course not. So let me share some of the lessons that I've learned in the past year. Number one, there is huge strength in numbers. Find allies, share your stories. If this is happening to you, chances are you're not the only one. Tell somebody about it. Keep notes, call a lawyer. That brings me to today. Here we are at this time that cries out for advocacy of the loudest variety. For ourselves, for each other, and for all the women who are not in this room today. For the women who do not enjoy the positions of power that we all do. As this conference proves, when women have a seat at the public policy table, things change for the better, and everyone benefits. #Women Rock. So I'll just end on this note. Another woman in media said something to me last week when we were talking about all this sexual harassment, and she said, it helped put this in perspective for me. She said, when Roger Ailes sexually harassed you and Gretchen Carlson and Megyn Kelly and all the other women who have come forward, he was making a calculation at that moment that you would never be as powerful as he was. And therefore, you would never be able to fight back. And I think it is safe to say, from where we all stand today, he miscalculated. So thank you all for listening.
So there's been a lot of discussion recently about the echo chamber of the media. And I know I noticed it right off the bat with Facebook and try to be very judicious about what I read and how often I check Facebook. But I'm wondering whether you agree that the ability to choose where you get your news means that you're going to go with the source that agrees with you. Just sort of comment on how, as a part of the media, how that either is or isn't the case in the current political climate.
Well, look, if I step away from here, can you guys still hear me? The microphone's still good, or should I take the handheld? It's good? Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that, because it was part of the motivation for my writing the book, Amanda Wakes Up, and I'm so glad, thank you, Leanne, for providing everybody with a copy, because that was how I was feeling. I started writing the book in 2012, during a different presidential race. And I was so frustrated by being in a media echo chamber. At the time I was working at Fox News, and I realized that, we were not covering all sides of every story. And that was very frustrating to me during that presidential race, that I felt hamstrung by being in a particular kind of partisan corner. Who doesn't long for the age when news was news and you didn't have to sort of identify yourself by which news network you watched, and you didn't feel, have to make some sort of like partisan choice. And so I, as you'll see in the book, that I had this fantasy, actually, which is why I started writing it, of having kind of this big tent news approach where it could be one size fits all for everybody, and it could be for left and right, and north and south, and old and young, and everybody could get all of their news in one place because it would be so balanced. And as you'll see when you read the book, that dream, that utopian vision for news ends up becoming like a Frankenstein monster, because what Amanda, our protagonist, finds is that when you insist on balance in news, that's not actually real journalism. Not every story is balanced 50-50. If you just put on a conservative and a liberal on screen and let them start arguing, that's not actually, you don't really get anywhere. That's not really what facts are. That's like a lot of heat without a lot of light. So, to your question, I heard people talking right before I came on about news literacy. This moment cries out for news literacy. You should get out of your echo chamber. You should try to go to, number one, a tried and true news organization. Do not get your news from Facebook, or as you saw in my voter panel, that's where they got their news, from Facebook, which is why they thought 3 to 5 million people in California, illegal people, voted. So Facebook is good for finding your high school friends. It is not, they're not journalists. They're not journalists that run Facebook, and they never will be. So you need to go to a tried and true and trusted news organization that has a track record of good journalistic standards. And then you should probably also go to one that you don't normally go to, and it doesn't completely comport with your comfort zone, and check in with that one once a day, once a week, whatever it is, because yes, you will see different angles and different perspectives, and I think that that's healthy. I think a steady news diet of only the things that make you feel comfortable have gotten us into some trouble in this country. So I recommend, and I don't mean going to like a fly-by-night website that's really weird with the conspiracy theories. I do not recommend that. But I do mean that a news organization that you don't normally check in with, and whether that is The Economist, whether that's BBC, whether that's just fill in the blank, whatever, Wall Street Journal, fill in whatever place you don't normally go. I recommend going there and read their op-eds, read their editorials, read their articles, see if they do it differently.
And in the era of fake news, particularly around the headlines, and I think there's bias in the presentation of certain, I don't have to think, I know there's bias in the presentation of certain news items. How do we advocate to a media outlet about better framing around issues, whether that is calling a mass murderer a terrorist, who gets called a terrorist, versus like mental health issues, or how we look at gun control is another example, whether it's like rights or is it control, and not just going necessarily around progressive outlets versus more conservative outlets. Like, how do we pitch those stories for the issues that we advocate on behalf of in a way that the media would be like, you know what, I'm going to pick that up. That's a different way of framing it, and I'm going to go that way.
Well, I think that the upside of social media, and I think that social media has a lot of downsides. From where I sit, I think it can be a bit of a cesspool of people like just venting their spleens. However, the upside is that now you can communicate directly, very directly, with your favorite journalist, your favorite news organization. My colleagues read their tweets all the time. I broke up with Twitter because it was a bad romance that I needed to get rid of. I felt that it was really toxic. However, I know that so many of my colleagues, from Chris Cuomo to Jake Tapper to Anderson Cooper, they read their Twitter feeds all the time. I am on Facebook, and so you can directly communicate that, and it does end up changing. When I go on social media, if there's a bit of a groundswell of people, or even if there's just one sort of well-worded, compelling post that says, you're not looking at gun control in this way, and here's how you should. May I suggest this? Perhaps you should talk to this person or read this article or the link. It does actually open my eyes. And so you can do it that way, which is like the one-on-one approach, or obviously you can write to the heads of news organizations. But I find that right now, we're in a particularly receptive time to how viewers are feeling, and you can get your direct message right to a journalist.
For me, it's really interesting hearing about this fake news stuff, especially since I was personally affected by real fake news, Pizzagate.
Because you live in that neighborhood?
Because my partner works at that restaurant.
Oh my gosh.
So it actually affected me, and that's real fake news. But my question is really, first of all, how do you kind of like work around being like targeted as that audience-wise? But also, one thing that was really confusing to me was that your colleague Megyn Kelly brought Alex Jones onto her show and interviewed him. And for me, it felt like you were giving a platform to somebody who spread this story that impacted me so much. in other people. And I'm kind of wondering, what's the journalistic angle for doing like an interview like that?
Yeah, okay, great, all great questions. Thank you for those. Couple things. In terms of being labeled fake news, it doesn't make me skip a beat. It doesn't make any of us at CNN skip a beat at all. And the reason is because, well, a couple things. We just keep doing our job, we just keep doing our job every day. We keep breaking stories, we keep investigating them, we keep researching them, we keep trying to get to the truth. That's what we're tasked with. We keep doing it. It hasn't changed anything about how we operate. But reinforcing that, because CNN was a little worried about whether or not we'd be tarnished with the label of fake news, our president, Jeff Zucker, commissioned a research study to see if it was having any effect. And I am happy to report that it has not had any diminution in the CNN news brand at all. In other words, CNN's viewers recognize that there's a category of fiction call it whatever you want, fiction writing, fake news, where people are deliberately deceiving people, okay? And they are based in Macedonia and Romania and Russia, and people recognize that that's a problem that we have to tackle. But they recognize that CNN is not in that category. They also recognize that just because the president or whomever, whatever public official doesn't like a story doesn't make it fake news. So our viewers get it. So we haven't had, look, our brand has never been stronger. We are having, I know that sometimes people think ratings are a dirty word. I think that they're wonderful because you can gauge if you're connecting with the audience and if it's resonating. We're having the most watched year we've ever had in CNN's history. So people still know that CNN is the a place to come for information, and that I'm very relieved that our viewers can discern the difference. So there's that. Now, to your other question about Alex Jones and the conspiracy theorists, I wish we wouldn't give these guys a platform. I wish they'd go away, but I am also sort of interested in what makes them tick. I am sort of interested in finding out why they do that and hearing from them about, do they realize how pernicious an effect that they're having on America? And so when Megyn Kelly interviewed him, what I think it takes is that if you're going to have somebody like that on, and if you're going to give them a platform, you have to prosecute them, and you have to hold their feet to the fire, and you have to show them the faces of the kids in Newtown, Connecticut, who were killed and mowed down in the mass shooting, and say, these are the kids who you say this isn't real? You think this didn't happen? Do you realize what you're saying to this parent? And have maybe like a TV queued up playing that parent's heartbreak and saying, like, how can you live with yourself when you hear what this parent wants to say to you? So I think that there's a way to do it where you hold their feet to the fire. And look, all I can tell you is that we wrestle with these things every day, all the time. There is no one answer. There's no pat answer to whether or not something is a good news story, a bad news story, legitimate, a bad platform, a good platform. Every day in meetings, we're rolling up our sleeves and wrestling with these ethical dilemmas. A lot of that is in the book too, as you'll see. This is a living, breathing thing. Journalism has high stakes, and we are duking it out every day to try to check our own ethics and bring you all the best information. And some days we get it right, some days we get it wrong, but we're trying.
My question, and it might be an impossible one to answer. First, I'm really glad that Me Too is coming out, the hashtag campaign, and I love the effects that it's had on people all over the media, Hollywood field. How is it, I guess, okay that Harvey Weinstein is getting all of this deserved effects, but someone who several months ago people spoke out against, Donald Trump, then presidential candidate, how is he able to be elected to the highest office in the country with women coming out and accusing him publicly, and then someone like Harvey Weinstein and others have had such dire consequences that I think should have been applied to Donald Trump as well?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that, but I have heard some people say that they think that the Harvey Weinstein, that this deluge of floodgates opening is actually a reaction to the frustration that so many women felt after the Access Hollywood tape, after the accusations against then candidate Donald Trump, that women who felt powerless then, or who felt that justice wasn't being served, or who felt like we were, yelling into the wind and not being heard, that what we're seeing today is the sort of manifestation of that frustration. It reaches a boiling point, when there's a groundswell and suddenly you have a finger in the dam and then the dam explodes. And so right now I feel that it's a dam exploding moment. And so it could be a response and a reaction to the frustration that people felt during the campaign. It could be that its time has come. And it could be that in terms of presidential politics, that what happens is that people really sort of vote for their self-interest, and you have to kind of compartmentalize and put blinders on to all the other things you don't like about your candidate, because maybe you're a one-issue voter, or maybe you're ready for a change, or maybe you're just sending a big FU to the establishment, or whatever it is that motivated you. You have to kind of turn a blind eye to the other things that you didn't like about your candidate, and maybe that's how people felt. But, I just feel like better late than never. I just feel like this is a moment and we should seize it, and we should note it, and we should do whatever we can to sustain it. And, hopefully that will, raise all boats going forward.
I also wanted to just thank you again, echoing that comment, for bringing up the sexual harassment issue right now, and reminding everybody that everybody can have a voice in changing that dynamic. And I'm wondering, I'll just challenge you and everyone in this room to maybe flip that to the pay equity issue. I love the colleague from your remark that said that the person who harassed you underestimated your power. I think we'd all agree that's absolutely correct. And I think that same dynamic is often true in pay equity issues. I know for me, and I think I might be one of the older people in this room, looking back on my career, I can think of a couple of instances where I took less money than I was worth. And now, as I'm over 50, I'm realizing that I've done a lot. I personally have done a disservice to younger women in the workplace, because I sort of set the tone in some situations that that's okay. And I've made it sort of a personal mission to never do that again. And I think that we can all work together as women to empower each other to negotiate more effectively, and to just say, no, I'm worth all those zeros, and when you're ready to recognize that and correctly estimate my power, to use your phrase, then I'll come work for you. I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that space that would help many, many women and young girls in America and across the world. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on what we can all do to change that dynamic in our own behaviors.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing your personal story about that. It's a tough one. I find this one to be such a tough one, because you have to know what your male colleague makes. And I don't always know what my male colleagues make. So I'm guessing, I'm spitballing. I don't know. In my world, and I'm sure in yours and everybody's, there's no sort of one set salary. So it's always a range, and the range can be vast. And my male colleagues, probably to protect their own inflated salaries, don't share that with me. So that is a tough one. I also have always found this to be a tough issue, because nowadays I can say, when somebody makes me a salary offer, no thank you, that's not good enough. But that's new. I couldn't do that in the first 20 years of my career. I was afraid that it would evaporate, that the offer would evaporate. I was always scared, and I'm inclined to say, oh, thank you. Yes, I'll take it, And so it's only, as we all know, the best power you ever have to negotiate is the power to walk away. But who can walk away from their salary? This is, I really struggle with it. I did have some gratifying moments in my past contract negotiation, because I had reached a certain level. Look, finally, with age comes experience and wisdom and a skill set. You know, it takes a long time to develop the skill sets that we all have. And that doesn't happen right when you graduate from college. And it didn't happen for me in the first 10 years in TV news. So finally, now, I have a certain skill set that I know doesn't come that easily, and it isn't a dime a dozen. And so finally, I was able, in my last contract negotiation, to twice, they came and offered me, money that obviously at times in my life, I would have said acquiesced immediately. And I was able to say, no, thank you. No, thank you. Because I had in my head what I wanted. And I was happy to, I wasn't happy, but I was willing to walk away if need be. But again, I couldn't do that for the first 20 years. And so I know that's the answer, to be willing to walk away, but I don't know how we can all do that with whatever financial situation we're in. But ask around, see if you can get information out of your male colleagues, see if you can get information out of your female colleagues about if they're willing to share with you the range of the salary. I never ask people like, how much do you make? I just say like, I'm just curious, what would the range of that salary be, just out of curiosity? And then sometimes people will share it.
I don't know, what's your day-to-day like? What's the process before you get on air, afterward, what you're doing? You referred to meetings before. I think that would just be really interesting to hear about.
Okay, you're gonna love the book. You're gonna love the book because part of why I wrote Amanda Wake's Apple was because I was, as I said, so frustrated about being in this news echo chamber and feeling all these ethical dilemmas and the frustrations of news, but also because I often get these questions about what time do you wake up? What's your day like? Where do you get your clothes? All of that sort of stuff. And so I knew that there was also, on the lighter side, interest in what goes on, sort of if I could peel back the curtain of a TV station. And when you do peel back the curtain of a TV network, you realize that there's all of these kind of interesting things happening during commercial breaks and beyond, and interesting relationships that are happening. You'll meet in the book all of the hair and makeup people and the camera crews and the relationship that you have with your co-anchor, which ends up being like a really intense relationship because you're stuck together every morning for 3 hours and can't move. So I wanted to let everybody in on that sort of behind the scenes feeling. But in general, but here's a preview. I get up at 3:15 every morning. Oh yeah. And I, sometimes shower. And something's got to give. I've decided it's cleanliness. And I get in the car, and from 3:40 to 4:40 is one of my most intense hours of the day, because my beloved producer, who is over there with the camera taking a picture of me, Jennifer Rivera, who is my brain and right hand, who I could never do my job without, she gets in at 1 o'clock every morning. So she is already gathering all of the articles I need, all of the research that I need, everything that I need in order to do the show for 3 hours. And from 3:30 to 4:30, that hour, Jen and I have a flurry of emails going back and forth where she's sending me articles, I'm reading them. I'm saying, okay, can you find Paul Ryan's soundbite from yesterday? He was on Chris Wallace's show. Cut me this soundbite. She sends it back. Is this the one you want? I'm like, no, I want the one 5 minutes before that. Cut it again. She sends it back. Is this what you want? I'm like, yes, but we also are going to need, what happened with Rand Paul? She sends me the article about Rand Paul. And can you tell me, is there a police report? She goes to look for the police report. And what am I going to need to know? So Trump is in what? He's in Japan today? Shinzo Abe, what's the event that they're having? She sends me the rundown of everything that happened. That is a harried, crazy hour where I am trying to cram for the exam. And I'm trying to absorb as much information as I can so I can regurgitate it from 6 to 9. And then I go in here, makeup, all my clothes are at work, so I can go into my pajamas, I get into my clothes at work, I go to hair and makeup, I inhale something for breakfast, I go on the set from 6 to 9. It's intense, it's like an oral exam in front of 1 million people every day. And then at 9, I stagger to my office and collapse on my sofa. I have a sofa in the office. I collapsed. I listened to a big network-wide conference call about sort of the marching orders for that day or what all the news events are, what we're going to be covering. And I kind of fall asleep and nap until like 10 a.m. or 10:30. And then I get up and we do the whole thing all over again. You know, I mean, that's basically what I do. I see what the news is going to be for the next day, who our guests are for the next day, if possible. This is a crazy news cycle. It's very, very hard to predict what will be happening the next day. And then at about noon, 11 or noon, I get in the car and I go home. And if I haven't napped at the office, I'll nap at home. And then my kids get off the school bus at 3:30. And I help with homework, and I shuttle to a soccer game or something, and then, we all eat dinner at like 6:30, and I try to go to bed at 8. And my kids are come and tuck me in now. My kids are 12, and 10, and they come and tuck me in, and then they go do, I don't know what they do. I go sleep. So.
So my question to you is, number one, how do you find allies while being secretive, I think, because as a young professional, it's hard to just come out and say, he did this to me, and then people believe you sometimes. So how do you find allies who are going through the same situation as you while being secretive and not like putting your career in jeopardy, number one? And then number two, what do you do for self-care and sanity around the time that it's happening? Because I think it's a long time sometimes when you're dealing with it, and for it to finally come out, and then for consequences to happen. So what is that process of finding allies, and then how do you stay sane throughout this whole process? Sorry, I know it's a long.
No, it's great. That's a great question. Those are excellent questions. In my experience, I should have gone. I had friends, obviously, a lot of friends at Fox News. And so I wish I'd gone into some of their offices and just shut the door behind me and said, hey, what's your experience? When you go into this office, what happens with you? Because I'll tell you what happens with me. So I wish that I had done that. So I would say start with your friends. And even if I had done that, there were always sort of whispers about, it wasn't stated, but there were always sort of winks and nods about, oh, you can call the office? Okay, see you later. There was something that wasn't being stated. There was always kind of a palpable feeling of something happening. But we were secretive. It was a taboo subject. It wasn't the most communicative, open environment. So now, in hindsight, I would have started with my friends. I would have had an open heart-to-heart with my friends. And so I recommend that, before just going to sort of random colleagues who may be more protective or more guarded. Start with your friends. In terms of taking care of yourself during it, what I found to be really empowering was to start to memorialize it, to start to write it down, to start to take notes. That was the one thing that I could do to take my power back, because it is such a sort of powerless feeling that you have to be able to fight back somehow. So I always find that I like writing. I find that helps me gather my thoughts. So that just gave me my power back. And during some of the times that were crazy, not the sexual harassment per se, but just the times that I felt that I was through the looking glass and that crazy things were happening, those were the genesis for the book. I didn't know it was going to turn into a book, but as I started writing down different scenarios and different things I was struggling with, I realized it was forming itself into a book. So I don't recommend that everybody write a book. That's really time consuming. But for me, that was a really sort of therapeutic outlet. So you have to figure out what your therapeutic outlet is. But again, I didn't call a lawyer. And the people who did, I think, showed us the way. I mean, I think that it's one thing for me to write down what's happening, but it's another thing to call a lawyer. I mean, that actually is even more action oriented. And so I guess I would recommend that. I mean, if I were to do it all over again.